Exynos cops it big time in tech circles. Samsung have decided to use it again, this time globally, in the Galaxy S24 FE. But it also isn't the same Exynos that they've used in the Galaxy S24. Some very slight differences. It's definitely different to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy that was in the S24 Ultra and in some of the S24s on a global scale. So how does it stack up, the Exynos 2400E? Today we're going to find out. Daniel here from SamMobile TV. Let's compare the Exynos 2400E to the 2400 and the 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy. The main thing I wanted to test is obviously against the S24 Ultra and see how different it is to the Snapdragon, but I've stuck the S24 in as well, just for good measure. The way I'm going to do this is across a series of tests. First, I want to establish a ceiling, and I think the only way really to do that at the moment is through benchmarking. I'm not normally a big fan of benchmarking, and I still am not, but I think to establish the ceiling, the high point of the performance, it's a good way to at least measure, and there's numbers that you can show against each other. Then I want to do some tests across different apps, LumaFusion for like video rendering, photo editing with Lightroom, and then sort of take a look at some of the core Galaxy experiences before finishing off with camera, but not in the way you might think with camera, but we'll get to that. Let's start with benchmarks. First thing to note is the different architecture that all three have. The S24 and the S24 FE, especially the Exynos 2400 variant of the S24, is near on the same, with a slightly lower clock speed for the single core processor. Outside of that, the architecture is identical. Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy, as you can see, is definitely working a lot differently to what the S24 FE Exynos 2400E is. There's a lot more sort of variations in the clusters and the frequency as well. The S24 Ultra in the test obviously has a higher ceiling, but it's not a runaway lead. I would dare say as well that my version of the S24 Ultra, being used a couple of times throughout the year now, pretty much exclusively, it's probably not running at its full capacity, and I've probably used it that day a little bit. I did make sure that all the apps were closed and the aircon was on in the room to keep it cool. It still showcases that the difference in performance at a benchmarking level is not really as drastic as you would expect. And I think it's definitely not as dramatic as people make it out to be. I then sort of moved on to the GPU. And again, they're both running very different ideas of graphics processing units, with the Snapdragon using a different one to what you've got on the S24 and S24 FE. What struck me was that in the Vulkan test, the S24 Ultra was better, and the time it took to complete was even. Better in terms of its score was higher, but not by much. But in the OpenCL test, the S24 Ultra was slow, ridiculously slow. I got stuck on about 33% for ages, whilst the S24 and the S24 FE were finished. And the scores were a bit of indicative of that as well, where the S24 and the S24 FE had better OpenCL benchmarking scores compared to the S24 Ultra. And it just shows for me that the S24 and the FE with the Exynos are very consistent when it comes to graphics, and depending on Vulkan or depending on OpenCL, you'll get a consistent experience, but using the S24 Ultra, it might differ. Something to be aware of. Now back to that CPU ceiling. Just how beneficial does that score actually translate to in real world usage? Because you're not running around using your phone only exclusively for benchmarking apps. No one will do that, especially not an S24 FE user. The first test was about LumaFusion. I really wanted to start with that video rendering. I think nowadays a lot of people do like to use their phone for video editing, and a lot of people might have this perception that the FE will be lesser when it comes to editing large videos. So on all three phones, I had LumaFusion loaded up, the same 10 clips from a day out at Burley that we had at a music festival, a safe one for families, I assure you. And I rendered the clip out in 4K, same settings on all the phones. What struck me was the S24 FE and the S24 with the Exynos were faster. And it wasn't just we'll just beat it by a fraction of a second. There was at least a good 1 or 2 seconds difference in the output speed. And look, on the surface of things, saving 1 or 2 seconds in video editing is not the end of the world. You can have 1 or 2 seconds longer and you're not losing time. But what it does mean is that everyone saying that the Exynos 2400E isn't good enough is wrong, because you can see it there in front of you. The performance of that processor in this test, video rendering outperforms the 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy. So people talking about the Exynos like it's really a bad deal really need to take a look at this and leave a comment below at your thoughts. I ran it a few times. Like, I did it on camera, but I'd done it 3 or 4 times before that off camera. And each time it was the same. There was no difference in the speed. The Exynos 2400E was better. The next one was Lightroom, and there was actually no discernible difference in exporting a photo. This was a raw photo as well. So there was a higher sort of, I guess, rendering process behind it, but every phone did it at the same speed. So there was no real understanding of that. What I did want to do next though, and what I remembered whilst I was testing it, was that you can actually copy edits that you've made to a photo across a whole gallery of photos in Samsung's gallery. So if you've made an edit, you can copy that edit and then paste it somewhere else. So I selected an album full of photos. I think it was 34 or 35 that ended up being selected. And I pasted the edits. I think this one, the S24 and S24 FE were sort of the winners, and the S24 Ultra lagged behind, which definitely wasn't what I was expecting. But the difference isn't that noticeable. So I think it doesn't matter which one you get, that large scale performance, you're not missing out on just because you're not getting the flagship 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy. I then wanted to move on to more core Galaxy experiences. Things like Galaxy AI definitely was the first one I wanted to try, but not the ones that you might think. All the generative edit, like removing people from photos, that's all done in the cloud. I've tried those tests. There's no difference in performance because they're not done on device. So I went to the first one I know that is on device, transcribing and voice recorder. There wasn't actually much of a difference between all of them. And I think, again, that speaks to the power and performance of having an Exynos chipset be flagship territory. Obviously, we know the history, but I think Samsung have definitely worked really hard. And you can see now that the gap difference is almost non-existent. And in some areas, it's actually better. The next thing I want to look at is the cameras, but not in the way that you would think. Because output-wise, we already know what we're going to get. I did a camera review on the FE last week. I've done multiple reviews of the S24 Ultra and the S24 in terms of camera comparisons earlier on in the year. We know that the S24 FE in terms of camera hardware will lack in the ultra-wide and the 3x category. It's just plain and simple. But what I want to showcase is the modes difference. What you can actually do with the cameras in terms of taking video, taking photos, and what you might miss thanks to the Exynos 2400E over the 8 Gen 3 for Galaxy. First of all, the Ultra has everything. It has 8K 30 from the 1X and the 5X. You've got the 4K 120 that it can do in Pro Video mode, the 4K 60 that can be done from all of the cameras, not just before you start recording, but as you're recording as well. You can switch to them. 4K dual recording, expert RAW. Every camera mode Samsung makes is on the S24 Ultra. Galaxy S24 has most of those in the sense that you can do 8K 30 from the main camera. The things it doesn't have, you haven't got the 8K at 5X. You haven't got the 4K 120 when it comes to Pro Video mode. It can't do 4K dual recording, where you can record from 2 lenses in 4K at the same time. It's only full HD. It can record 4K 60 from all the cameras, but unlike the Ultra, you actually can't switch to those other cameras as you're recording, which is a bit of a shame. But the FE, well, that drops the most features. As well as those things that the S24 can't do, on here you can't do other things as well. Like you can't do 4K 60 from any of the rear cameras except the main one, which of course means you won't be able to switch whilst you're recording also. It can't do, and this is getting super granular, Quad HD super steady at 60 frames per second from any of the rear cameras, like the ultra wide or a 2x crop, only from one camera. There's other little things too, like in Pro Video mode on the S24 Ultra and the S24, you can isolate the front and rear microphones. This can't do that. Doesn't have that capability. It's only OmniMic or Bluetooth and USB. It also can't use any lens in hyperlapse. The S24 Ultra and the S24, you can. So you lose that ability too. And then just to top that all off, there's no expert RAW in here. So if you're someone who likes that little bit extra when it comes to control, you can't use Expert RAW and plus get the processing that comes with it. Now, some of those things are Exynos 2400E related, but most of those camera deficiencies actually stem from the fact that these two here, the ultra wide and the 3X, are not good enough when it comes to hardware. Their recording capabilities especially just can't keep up with the demands of what the other features can do. Now overall, performance-wise, you're not actually sacrificing a lot. The Exynos 2400E can keep up with the S24 Ultra and the standard S24 just fine. What it comes down to is your needs. And that's really, at the end of the day, why this phone exists. Because if you have a perception that you need a lot from your phone, and some people have that, then you will gravitate towards the Ultra. This is the phone that has everything, after all. It's got your S Pen, it's got your massive front display, it's got your big 5,000 mAh battery, and it's got your most flexible camera system that Samsung have available to them, barring the Fold, of course. But if you have a perception of yourself that you are just a basic smartphone user, that you don't do a lot on your phone, then the Galaxy S24 FE will literally offer you everything that you need on a phone and do it at a performance level that is flagship capable. A lot of people will say that the Exynos is rubbish before even trying it out for themselves. A lot of that's down to some of the mental conditioning that the internet does, where you read people say Exynos is trash, Exynos is rubbish, how dare Samsung use Exynos, it's cost cutting. Why wouldn't Samsung want to use a processor that their own Samsung Electronics semiconductor manufacturing plant manufactures in their own mobile phone products? For the price point, the S24 FE more than will give you your money's worth in terms of performance, in terms of smartphone capability. This has it. It's not me defending it, it's just my experience with it. Hit subscribe to SamMobile TV for more videos like this one. If you want to order an S24 FE for yourself, here's the link in our description. Go visit our website and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.